people talk about faith a lot, and one phrase comes up all the time. You only need faith as small as a mustard seed. It sounds encouraging. It sounds simple. It sounds like Jesus is setting the bar really low. It's almost like he's saying, don't worry if you don't have much faith. Just a tiny, tiny speck will do. That's enough. We hear it in sermons. We see it on coffee mugs. We say it to friends who are struggling. It's meant to be a comfort. It's meant to take the pressure off. But is that what Jesus was really saying? Did he look at his followers who were struggling to understand him and essentially tell them that a minimal amount of belief was all they needed to unlock incredible power? When we look at the moments Jesus actually said this, the context is a little different. It's more complicated. It's more challenging, and it's actually more hopeful than the simple low-bar interpretation we're used to. Jesus wasn't talking about the quantity of our faith. He was talking about the quality and the nature of it. The conversation isn't about how much faith we can muster up. It's about what kind of faith we have. Let's look at the actual stories. There are two places where Jesus uses this mustard seed comparison for faith. Both times he's talking to his disciples, and both times they are in a moment of failure or confusion. The first time is in the book of Matthew. Jesus, along with Peter, James, and John, is coming down from a mountain. On that mountain, something incredible happened. They saw Jesus transfigured, talking with Moses and Elijah. They heard the voice of God. It was a peak spiritual experience. But when they get back to the valley, they walk right into a scene of chaos and failure. A man runs up to Jesus and kneels before him. He's desperate. His son is suffering terribly. The man says his son has seizures and often falls into fire or water. He's in constant danger. Then the man says something crucial. He says, I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. And imagine that. The disciples, the guys who had been given authority by Jesus to cast out demons and heal the sick, failed. They tried their methods. They said their prayers, and nothing happened. The boy was still sick. The father was still desperate. The crowd was probably mocking them. Jesus' reaction is intense. He doesn't say, oh, well, you guys tried your best. He says, you faithless and corrupt generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? That's strong language. He's clearly frustrated. He's not frustrated with the desperate father. He's frustrated with his own disciples. He then heals the boy himself instantly. Later, the disciples come to Jesus in private. They are embarrassed and confused. They ask him, why couldn't we drive it out? This is the moment. This is the context for the famous phrase. And Jesus tells them, because you have so little faith. Then he says it. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Now, if we just pull that one sentence out, it sounds like he's saying you guys failed because your faith was smaller than a mustard seed. If you had just had that tiny amount, you would have succeeded. This makes it about a measurement, like they had 0.01 units of faith, but they needed 0.02 units. But that doesn't quite fit with the intensity of his frustration. He called them a faithless generation. That sounds like a problem of kind, not just amount. Let's hold that thought and look at the second story. This one is in the book of Luke. The apostles, another name for the disciples, come to Jesus with a request. They say to him, increase our faith. This seems like a good, humble prayer. They recognize their weakness. They want more of a good thing. They are basically saying, Jesus, we don't have enough faith. Give us more. Fill up our spiritual gas tank. They are thinking quantitatively. They see faith as a substance that they can have more or less of. Jesus' reply is the mustard seed saying again. He says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, okay, here's 3 steps to getting more faith. He doesn't say, pray harder and I'll give you a bigger dose of it. He completely sidesteps their request for more faith. Instead, he talks about the kind of faith they already should have. He redirects their entire way of thinking. They are asking for a bigger quantity. He's telling them they need a different quality. So, in both stories, the mustard seed isn't presented as a pat on the back. It's a correction. In Matthew, it's a correction for their powerlessness. In Luke, it's a correction for their misunderstanding of how faith even works. They were focused on the size of their faith. Jesus was focused on the source and nature of it. To really get this, we have to understand what a mustard seed meant to the people listening to Jesus. In their world, a mustard seed was proverbial. It was the smallest seed a farmer would ever handle. When people wanted to talk about something incredibly tiny, they'd say it was like a mustard seed. So, on one level, Jesus is using a common, relatable image for smallness. But there's more to a mustard seed than just its size. A mustard seed is not a grain of sand. A grain of sand is tiny and dead. it will never become anything more than a tiny grain of sand. A mustard seed is tiny, but it is alive. It contains within its minuscule shell the blueprint for a huge plant. A mustard seed, when planted, doesn't stay a mustard seed. It grows, and it grows into one of the largest plants in a Palestinian garden, sometimes reaching 10 feet high or more. It becomes a bush so large that birds can come and perch in its branches. Jesus talks about this in another place in the parable of the mustard seed. He says the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It starts as the smallest of all seeds, but when it grows, it becomes the largest of garden plants. The key characteristic of the mustard seed in Jesus' teaching isn't just its smallness. It's its life. It's its potential. It's the shocking contrast between its tiny beginning and its massive end result. So when Jesus talks about faith as a mustard seed, he isn't just saying a tiny amount of faith. He's talking about a specific kind of faith. A faith that is alive. A faith that has the very life of God in it. A faith that, even if it feels tiny and insignificant in the moment, has the inherent potential to connect with the infinite power of God and grow into something huge. Think about it this way. What the disciples had in the story with the demon-possessed boy was not a tiny amount of real faith. It was probably a large amount of the wrong kind of faith. Maybe they were trusting in the formula Jesus had given them before. Maybe they were trusting in their own status as his followers. Maybe they were just going through the motions. Their faith was like a grain of sand. It was dead. It had no life, no connection to the true power source. That's why Jesus called them faithless. They were operating on their own, disconnected from the Father. What Jesus was calling for was not a bigger amount of that dead faith. That wouldn't have helped. He was calling for a completely different thing, genuine living faith. A faith that is a real vital connection to God. And the point is, if you have that genuine article, that living seed, the initial size of it doesn't matter. A tiny living seed can move a mountain. A giant dead rock can't do anything. This changes everything. The focus shifts from us and our feelings to the object of our faith, God himself. The power to move the mountain doesn't come from the faith. The power comes from God. Faith is just the connection. Faith is the empty hand that receives the gift. An empty hand is not impressive. The gift is. The power isn't in our act of belief. The power is in the one we believe in. So a person with mustard seed faith isn't someone who's managed to squeeze out a tiny bit of spiritual energy. It's someone who has placed their trust, however fragile and shaky it feels, in the living God. Their faith might feel small to them, but because it's the right kind of faith in the right person, it is connected to an infinite source of power. This also explains Jesus' answer to the disciples in Luke. They cry out, "Increase our faith." They are looking inward. They are trying to build up some internal resource. They think if they could just feel more faithful, they could do more. Jesus' response about the mustard seed is a way of saying, you're looking in the wrong place. Stop trying to measure your faith. Stop trying to grow it yourself. Just make sure the little faith you do have is planted in the right soil. Make sure it's placed in God. If it is, it's alive. And if it's alive, it has all the potential in the universe. He's telling them that faith is not a muscle you build through spiritual workouts. It's a relationship of trust you enter into. And once you're in that relationship, even on your weakest day, you are connected to the power that created the universe. This should be incredibly freeing for us. Most of us, if we're honest, feel like our faith is small most of the time. We are racked with doubts, we feel weak, we fail, we look at the spiritual giants we read about and feel like we come up short. The old interpretation of the mustard seed that you just need a tiny bit, she can sometimes make us feel worse. We think, I can't even move a small hill, so my faith must be even smaller than a mustard seed. I must be a total failure. But with this new understanding, the pressure is off. The question is not, how big is my faith today? The question is, who is my faith in? Is my trust, even my wavering, doubting, struggling trust, placed in Jesus? Is he the object of my faith? If the answer is yes, then I have the mustard seed. I have the living thing. It might not feel impressive. It might feel like the smallest, most insignificant thing in my life. But it's alive. It connects me to the God who can say to a mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea. The power isn't in me or my feeling of faith. The power is in him. This makes sense of another story in the Gospels. A man comes to Jesus with a sick son, just like in the other story. Jesus tells him, everything is possible for one who believes. The father has an amazingly honest response. He doesn't puff out his chest and say, I believe. He cries out, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. Think about that prayer. It's a contradiction. I believe, help my unbelief. He is admitting that his faith is small, weak, and mixed with a whole lot of doubt. According to the faith meter way of thinking, he should have failed. His faith was nowhere near 100%. But what did he have? He had a mustard seed. It was a tiny, struggling, but living faith. He wasn't trusting in his own ability to believe. In his moment of weakness, he was turning to the only one who could help. He was placing his tiny, struggling faith in the right person, and Jesus honored it. And Jesus healed his son. This man understood what the disciples in the other stories hadn't yet grasped. He wasn't asking for a bigger quantity of faith, he was exercising the tiny bit of living faith he had by asking for help from the source of all faith. So what does it mean to move a mountain or uproot a tree? Was Jesus speaking literally? Maybe, but it's more likely he was using hyperbole, a common teaching tool, to make a point about seemingly impossible obstacles. A mountain can be anything in our lives that seems immovable. It could be a deeply ingrained sinful habit. It could be a broken relationship that seems beyond repair. It could be a situation of injustice that feels permanent. It could be a personal struggle with despair or anxiety that feels like a heavy weight you can never get out from under. Jesus is saying that when our tiny living faith is connected to the power of God, nothing is truly impossible. This is not a magic formula. It's not a name it and claim it guarantee that we can get whatever we want by just believing hard enough. That's just another version of focusing on our own power. Instead, it's an invitation to shift our perspective, to stop looking at the size of our mountain and the size of our faith, and to start looking at the size of our God. When we are faced with an impossible mountain, our natural tendency is to look inside ourselves. Do I have enough faith to handle this? Am I strong enough? Jesus' teaching turns that on its head. He says the question is not about the adequacy of your faith, it's about the adequacy of your God. And the God of the Bible is more than adequate. This means we can be honest about our weakness. We can be like the father who cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." We can come to God not pretending to have a huge, unshakable faith, but with the small, struggling, mustard seed-sized faith we actually have. And we can trust that this is enough, not because the faith itself is powerful, but because it connects us to the one who is. The disciples wanted to feel powerful. They wanted a bigger dose of faith so they could do impressive things and not fail in front of a crowd. Jesus was trying to teach them a deeper lesson about dependence. He was moving them from a mindset of self-reliance to one of God-reliance. The goal isn't to have a faith so big that you feel strong. The goal is to have a faith so real, even if it feels small, that you are constantly aware of how strong God is. So, did Jesus say we only need faith as small as a mustard seed? The word "only" is the tricky part. If only means we can get by with a minimal, barely there, almost non-existent belief, then no. That's not what he meant. He called the disciples faithless for having that kind of dead, disconnected belief system. But if the question means, is a faith that feels small and weak to me but is genuinely placed in Jesus sufficient, then the answer is a resounding yes. It is more than sufficient, because that tiny living seed is the start of everything. It's the one thing necessary. It's the conduit through which the world-changing, mountain-moving, tree-uprooting power of God can begin to work. We should stop trying to put a tape measure to our faith. It's not a competition. It's not a resource to be stockpiled. Faith is a relationship of trust, and in any relationship, trust can feel strong one day and shaky the next. That's normal. The key is where that trust is placed. A small trust in a totally reliable person is worth infinitely more than a huge trust in someone who will let you down. The message of the mustard seed is not an excuse for spiritual laziness, it's a cure for spiritual anxiety. It tells us to stop obsessing over our own performance and our own feelings. It invites us to look away from ourselves and look to Christ. He is the one who is faithful. He is the one who is powerful. Our job is simply to connect to him, even with the smallest of threads. Because that thread of genuine trust is enough for him to work with. It's a living seed. And in the hands of the master gardener, a living seed is a thing of unlimited potential.